individual humans are just part of a much larger system that I call the global brain or the global superorganism. And then you see that all kind of things emerge at that higher level that would not be able to emerge if the individual human is the top level. Individual humans have limited capabilities, they have limited understanding. If you want to really go beyond that, you need to bring together lots of different things. And bringing them together, then you get this emergence, you get this deeper insight that isn't just a sum of the individual insights. So that allows us to solve problems at the emergent level that we wouldn't be able to solve at the individual level. So we have to give up this idea that it's the individual human that is the top level of evolution.
This is Daniel Fagelli. You're tuned into The Trajectory, and this is our 23rd episode in the Worthy Successor series, where we imagine what might be the kind of flourishing of life beyond humanity that we should strive for. In this particular episode, we think about emergent systems. There seem to be a kind of symbiogenesis in the biological sphere where new things combine, create new things that compete and cooperate in new ways, allow for new possibilities, et cetera, et cetera. That seems to be continuing into technology. Where does that leave humanity? And what does that mean for the next few steps of symbiogenesis? Biology normally moves rather slowly. Life forms change rather slowly. It seems as though that may be changing, and embracing that process and maybe guiding in some light way where that trajectory goes would be an important job for humanity. And there is a thinker who's been considering these things for much longer than most people have, by the name of Francis Heylighen. Francis is a professor at the Free University of Brussels. He received his PhD many a decade ago. His focus is on cybernetics, on sort of self-organizing systems, and he has many very interesting essays on exactly that topic linked in the show notes. In this episode, we talk about self-organizing systems and their expansion through time and what that expansion might look like going forward. Francis has actually a good deal of optimism about the transitions ahead for artificial intelligence and general intelligence that I found to be a pretty compelling argument. So I'm interested to take a look at what you think about Francis's arguments, but I'll save my longer thoughts for the end of this episode as usual. Without further ado, this is Francis Heylighen here on The Trajectory. So Francis, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to diving into the general Worthy Successor questions with you, but there's a lot of perspectives that you have about this topic at a high level that I think people should understand. I think you're one of the few people in the world, in my opinion, that rightly frames the necessity of a worldview shift to adapt to the kinds of emergent changes we are undergoing now with AGI, biotechnology, and this broader new sphere that seems to be forming. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love for you to put in your words the sort of stories, as you put it, that we have gone through, including kind of this third story that maybe you're hoping to bring about and think is adaptive for humanity. Let's just kind of set the table to start there, if we could.
Well, it's a concept that I actually get from the Human Energy Project, of which I'm a part, which is the idea that we can subdivide the different worldviews into three stories. Not necessarily three individual stories, but three families of stories. So the first one is the traditional mythical or religious one, where you have a story about how the universe was created, how humans were put in that world, what the task is of humans, how to live in that world. That's a traditional story you find, for example, in the book Genesis of the Bible. But that story obviously was not quite accurate given our modern scientific knowledge. So we see a second story appear. The second story is what I would call the clockwork universe. It's a story that's most associated with the name of Newton, so it's often called Newtonian worldview. And what it says is basically the world is a collection of material objects, and these material objects move through space and time according to fixed laws of nature. So it's a clockwork. That means everything that could happen is already determined beforehand. It's a clock it runs forward. You can't stop it, you can't change it. It runs according to the fixed laws of nature. So many people have said, well, that second story, well, maybe it helps us to understand lots of things, like you can, for example, use it to calculate exactly when a rocket that you shoot from the planet Earth will reach the planet Mars. It's very accurate in that respect, but in terms of what's going on in the mind, what's going on in life, what's going on in biology, it's basically useless. So that leads us then to the third story, which I call the self-organizing universe. It's a universe that's evolving. It's evolving in a way that is not predictable, but there are certain regularities in there. You can see that there is a tendency of evolution to produce more complex things and things that are more intelligent. So you see an evolution from, let's say, from atoms, molecules, bacteria, animals, humans, and then what comes beyond humans. So it's this kind of progressive view of things becoming smarter and more complex.
Yeah, and it's sort of the way I frame it mentally a little bit. I want to see if this sits with you. Is it seems to me, in many regards, the kind of mythic tale to the Newtonian tale is a bit of sort of an understanding that there is a way to grasp what is going on. It's not all mysterious. And there may even be some control we can have to kind of improve our conditions. In other words, we might be able to figure out how to power a mill with the wind or with water. We might be able to, like you had said, launch that rocket and discover what is on the planet of Mars, what kinds of objects, etc. It does grant, the age of exploration was predicated on understanding the stars in some level and a heliocentric worldview and whatever. So it's given us a degree of sort of it's opened the scope and scale of our sets of freedoms and our ability to set goals and maybe grasp of the world, but it does have its limitations. It seems like the next worldview, the way I nutshell it mentally, and I'd love your view on this, is it actually takes into account the fact that all is not simply material objects. All is not billiard balls. All is process. Exactly. That the solar system is a process. Our human lifespans are a process, but actually humanity is a process. And I know you put a lot of emphasis on the Darwinian insight being incredibly important here and being able to be broadly applied to things like culture, like technology, like the solar system, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems like an embrace of process is one of the paramount sort of changes that happens from story 2 to 3. What do you see as the key distinction? What stands out for you?
Well, the key distinction, it's something I actually originally developed in my PhD many years ago. It's that in the Newtonian worldview, you have what I call distinction conservation. You start by assuming that there are distinct objects with distinct properties, and whatever is distinct remains distinct. That means nothing really new appears. Things don't merge, things don't disappear, things don't split. Everything is following this fixed trajectory like the billiard balls. The billiard balls may hit each other, but the billiard balls remain distinct. So nothing qualitatively new appears. You just move things about. You move them from one place to another place, and you can calculate how it moves from one place to another place. But nothing novel appears. While what you look at evolution, you see that completely novel things appears, like animals, humans, and then these higher level intelligences. There is a change of distinction. New types of categories appear.
Yeah, and in some regards, there's kind of the variation which we see in genetics, et cetera. Okay, this bird has a longer beak, shorter beak, whatever the kind of banal early Darwinian examples were, but also this kind of symbiogenesis of broader expanding systems. There's kind of an emergentness to the entire shebang. When you consider why it makes sense, or maybe is beneficial to us to tilt into the third worldview. I guess the way I see it, I'd love to see if you see it as this the same way. The tilt from worldview 1 to 2 was that worldview 2, the Newtonian view, if we want to put it that way. Some people have called it kind of like modernity or whatever. We could give it any name, the shift from dark ages to, semi-modernity, seems to have granted us more powers. In other words, by understanding that there isn't just frozen history, you die and then you're in heaven, by understanding that maybe we could investigate, understand, and improve components of what's around us and invent new things. Maybe that allowed us to think about even our social systems. Is this king actually put here by God, or are there ways to organize ourselves that might behoove us in new ways? So it opened up the set of powers to solve new problems. Again, to investigate, to find the new world, so to speak, to do a whole variety of different things. What are the new set of powers that this third worldview grants us? In other words, why adopt it? Because it doesn't seem like argument is what gets us a new worldview. It seems like the adaptiveness of the worldview, to apply your general Darwinian kind of idea, seems to be what gets the worldview adopted. What do you see as the drivers there? What's the advantage of story 3?
Well, the advantage of story 2 is because you know how things move and move in the broad sense. So you can generalize it to some state space where things change in a particular way. You know that if you push a billiard ball from one position to another position, its trajectory will change in this particular way. If you have your rocket going to Mars and you boost it with a rocket to go a little bit more to the left or to the right, you know that its trajectory will change in a particular way. So you can manipulate things, but within their space. That means you're not manipulating at the level of novel things. The level of novel things is the level of what I call emergence. An emergent property is a property where you put things together, and when they are together, they can do things that none of them could do separately. The billiard ball or the rocket, you can move it and it will do something slightly different from what it did before, but it's not qualitatively new. Well, if you put things together, you have these emergent properties like life, intelligence, consciousness, that at some moment emerge and they weren't there before. It's something qualitatively new. So that requires what I call this distinction dynamics. Instead of assuming that things that are distinct remain distinct, you need to understand that new properties arise that are new categories, new qualitatively different things, different properties like, let's say, life, intelligence, consciousness, beauty. They emerge if you put things together in a certain way, something qualitatively new appears.
And what does that give us? In other words, when we understand emergence and we understand things to be processes, from species to technology to intelligence itself seems to be sort of taking new shapes in this emergent way that you've articulated, in terms of societies and organizations, and maybe now with technology merging in with minds, et cetera, et cetera. When we adopt the worldview of this emergence, this evolution, this process, which requires us to let go of some pretty hard things, like the stasis and centrality of man's moral value and volition as the main character of the entire cosmos is not something people are willing to give up easily, Francis, right? I mean, like, they had to burn Bruno at the stake, and Copernicus had to publish right before he died because he didn't want to be burned at the stake. And so it seems to me that while we are ostensibly modern, we still pretty ardently grip with white knuckles the notion of man as the stasis within. So we might admit that technology is a process, and the fall and rise of dynasties is a process, and business is a process. But surely our centrality and moral value is not to be questioned or moved. It seems very hard to move that position. Why do you suspect that it would behoove us to move into this third story? Like, what are the benefits? Because the downsides are an extreme threat to our ego here.
Well, one of the fundamental concepts I use, and that's a concept I actually got from an older colleague of mine, Valentin Turchin, it's a concept of a meta-system transition. That means a transition to a higher level of complexity or intelligence. And you might say that in the modern view, in the Newtonian worldview, it's kind of like individual humans that are the top level of intelligence, the top level of understanding. And what we see is that individual humans are just part of a much larger system that I call the global brain or the global superorganism. And then you see that all kind of things emerge at that higher level that would not be able to emerge if the individual human is the top level. Individual humans have limited capabilities, they have limited understanding. If you want to really go beyond that, you need to bring together lots of different things. And bringing them together, then you get this emergence, you get this deeper insight that isn't just a sum of the individual insights. So that allows us to solve problems at the emergent level that we wouldn't be able to solve at the individual level. So we have to give up this idea that it's the individual human that is the top level of evolution.
Yeah, well, it seems to me as though it might have behooved us to believe humanity is the top level of evolution because change, in terms of the shape of humans, I have fingernails, I have 2 eyes, I have a certain chromosome that's, in many respects similar to yours in terms of how many there are, et cetera, et cetera. This shape was actually not really under that much threat. So when we invented the windmill or even the telephone, it was like, okay, humans will use those things. But now we see biotechnology and understanding of the genome itself. We see artificial general intelligence. We see immersive AI worlds that will allow people to coordinate, collaborate, or even escape maybe away from, the natural state of things. It seems like we now can't deny. It was possible to think of process outside of humanity. Now it seems like the forces are pressing so hard that actually we cannot deny it anymore. We have to somehow embrace this, right? Japan, for example, what I think of sometimes, Japan isolated themselves from the West for a great many years, as did China, but they observed what that kind of isolation and denial of modernity implied for China and for India, and they wished not for the same fate. And so the Meiji Restoration was a very robust embracing of modernity, keeping as much of their own values as they were able to muster. They had things they cared about, but they needed to make sure those things were strong and adaptive in a new way. And so society coordinated, not into little fiefdoms of shoguns or whatnot, various and sundry little warlords who for a long time lived at peace, but kind of still carried swords and all that. They had to coordinate in entirely new ways and kind of embrace it because change was going to hit them whether they wanted it or not. It seems to me, Francis, that we could deny man as a process when change was as slow as when the telephone was invented. We could deny that man was a process when we invented the windmill. I don't think we can deny that man is a process as we head into AGI, brain-computer interface, bioengineering, etc. This is my supposition about why this new worldview sort of will press itself into the world out of necessity. What parts of that do you agree or disagree with, or do you see it in a little bit of a different light?
I basically agree with that. Part of this second story, this Newtonian worldview, is that the world consists of different objects. And so general assumption is objects are material, passive things that are just there, while humans are special kind of objects with a mind, with kind of agency. That was the idea of Descartes, mind-body dualism. All the things in the world are basically just passive objects, except humans. Humans have this special quality of mind, so they are this special kind of object and they are the top level. But now we see that we understand more and more about the physiology, the neurology of people. We see that their mind is actually this very complicated emergent process of, at the level of the body, of all the metabolism, of all the circulation of blood, at the level of the brain, of all these electrical signals that are passed on from one neuron to another neuron while changing the connections between the neurons. So we see that it is actually a very complicated process that you can intervene in lots of different ways. Simplest way, you take a particular drug, and the drug may make you more creative or more relaxed or more concentrated, you are manipulating that process at a chemical level, but you're also manipulating it at lots of other levels, depending on the information you receive, depending on the people you talk with, depending on practices like physical exercise or meditation. You change the way your mind works. So the whole process, now that we understand it better, it's a process that is changing in all kinds of different ways. And the more we learn how to manipulate that process, the more we can make that process more effective. And that is a little bit the essence of my worldview, we might say. By understanding more how things in the world function and change, we can make them work better, and in particular, we can make ourselves work better, because we have, it's pretty obvious, as humans, we have all kinds of limitations, cognitive limitations, emotional limitations, physical limitations. Now we have the science to go beyond these limitations.
Yeah, well, two things dawn on me as you were speaking. One of them was that, like, it seems like the Newtonian worldview from the mystic one opens up more complexity and a willingness to engage with that complexity. So on the one hand, animals are, they're put there by God either for us to eat or run away from or whatever. And that's it. There aren't more questions to be asked. Eat them or run from them, period. And then with the Newtonian worldview, maybe we would think about, what are the purpose of these organs? Or, maybe we could look at the relative value of different livestock, or we could investigate certain things. Similarly, like the stars moved because God willed it. And then the Newtonian worldview would sort of examine that and then maybe find more value there. So it's a willingness to engage with certain kinds of complexity, and in so doing, benefit by being able to work better with and behoove our goals better in a world that is more complex. And it seems like this is one more step, this third story of engaging with new things that unless we, I guess Francis Bacon is a great banner carrier for the second worldview in some regards, but his statement carries pretty well into the third worldview, which is that nature to be commanded must be obeyed. And if we deny that things are process and that there's a ton of emergence and change and that nothing is kind of eternally forever here, that we are talking about ongoing processes, we can then wield that knowledge to make sure that life persists in more powerful forms, that we ourselves can solve more of the problems we're struggling with. So it almost seems like humans have to titrate themselves with only so much complexity that their minds and cultures at that time can deal with. And the worldview is almost the container of like, how much can we handle? This is what was dawning on me as you were speaking. Like, how do you think about it?
Well, it's a classical problem, that is, why did science and industry and technology emerge in Europe and not, for example, in China or in the Islamic world, which were indeed more advanced in the Middle Ages.
In certain eras, yes.
And you might say the Newtonian worldview was a kind of a necessary intermediate step. I mean, one of the theories about why China didn't develop modern science was that the Chinese had this very holistic process view. There is the Tao. Nature is extremely complex. It's self-organizing. We as little humans, we can't really understand that. I mean, we can't really predict it. While the Newtonians, you might say, had a very naive view, like, well, the world is just this collection of objects that are moving through space, and we have our mathematics, and we can calculate where the planet will be at that moment. You might say it was a simplistic view, but it was a necessary intermediate step, because you start by doing pretty simple things like calculating the trajectory of a cannonball or the trajectory of a planet. And then you start looking at what's happening inside the body, and it turns out to be all much more complicated. But still you have kind of the optimism like, well, if we can calculate the movement of a planet, maybe we can kind of calculate the movement of a molecule in the body. And then it turns out it's not that simple, but if we use these and these models, then we are getting somewhere. And like that, you finally could say that the Newtonian worldview got to the level where they had the wisdom of the Chinese, the holistic worldview, but now they had tools to actually understand it and to predict. And that's where we are now. We need to kind of synthesize this more holistic process view that you might associate with Eastern philosophy. And the Newtonian worldview is this: you can make precise mathematical models, and that allows you to predict, if I do this, then this and this will happen.
Absolutely. Well, it seems to me, we got a couple more questions about this worldview, but there's so much here, and I really want to hear your opinions on this. It seems to me as though the true adoption of this worldview would imply letting go of things that are far too precious for people, far too sacred. And again, the primacy of man, the eternal main characterness in the entire cosmos until its heat death of Homo sapiens sapiens, this relatively new flash in the pan species who certainly has an impressive number of powers, cognitive and otherwise, but and cultural and whatnot, but is clearly part of a process. To give up that static pedestaled position seems a very high price. My suspicion is that unless it's almost like to get most people to cross that line would require almost, I think about it this way, I would love to know how you think about it. I think about it as identifying as the flame versus the torch. So the great flame seems to be expanding from a single cell or something below a single cell out into a flatworm, into some proto-reptile, into mammalia, into Homo sapiens sapiens, etc. Much conflict, much coordination along the whole process. But, this bubbling outwards, there's a greater process birthing things like consciousness, birthing things like love out of these kind of seemingly evolutionary sort of tractor states. So everything we see as valuable or scary has bubbled forth from this primary thing, which seems to be the unraveling process. This seems to be the flame. The flame seems to be the birther and undergirder of that which is value, like consciousness. Consciousness seems to have bubbled up because it was useful for something to be conscious, to kill something, or to avoid being killed. This seems a pretty plausible story for the emergence of why we play a movie in our heads. And so some fish did it first, I'm sure, or insect. And so, that's the flame. We are a torch. Now, the unfortunate thing, when you see that all is process, and processes are moving very quickly now, is that all torches are temporary, as it turns out. Individuals, species, substrates, things are temporary. It turns out that actually that's true. Lucretius was right. Heraclitus was right. And so, and some people accuse them, or maybe identify them with more of the Eastern worldview you talked about, which has its accuracies, as you bring up. To identify as the flame would seem to be what would be necessary to embrace this third worldview, because the third worldview would beckon immediately. Yes, our participation in, but soon maybe our dissipation in and symbiosis with an alien set of unfolding intelligences that are not us. They don't have opposable thumbs. They don't, go water skiing and walking their Labrador retrievers. They will do entirely new things beyond our conception. This is alien and to many people, evil. And so for you, it seems to me identifying with the flame would be required, but it's very hard to have people expected to do that. What do you think will tip the scale to get people to embrace the third story?
Well, in a sense, if necessary, we can go back to the first story. In the first story, there is God who is above humans. And so humans should not be believing that they know everything and they can do everything, because anyway there is the will of God that is steering us. People were willing to accept that for a very long time. Now after the Newton, they became much more individualistic. They more wanted to see humans in control. But if you really are willing at some stage to believe that God decides everything, you can as well believe that there is some higher intelligence that will take over. Now, I personally am not religious, so I don't need that kind of a worldview, but I have a worldview that you might say is intrinsically optimistic. That see, this I look at the world and I see a tendency towards progress. Things go wrong occasionally, but generally speaking, there is more progress than regress, which means that if you have trust in this ability of evolution to solve problems, why not go along with it? You don't need to steer it. I mean, when you're in a plane, you're also not steering the plane. You trust the pilot. When you're on a boat, you trust the skipper of the boat. You don't need to always be in control. So if we can convince ourselves that this process that is moving us forward is a process that most likely will result in a better position than where we are now, I don't see the problem in not wanting to go along with it, in being afraid of it.
Well, it seems as though one could pretend that Heraclitus's river could be frozen and stopped when we invented the telephone and the windmill. But it seems like, to your point, so again, Japan could isolate themselves when the Dutch were however far ahead of Japan, right? Not 16 miles ahead of Japan. They were a little bit ahead of Japan. Then Japan could lock it down. But as soon as Commodore Perry rolls up from the United States with these belching gigantic steamships and these weapons never before possibly conceived by the Japanese, it became self-evident that, actually, there isn't a denial of change. There isn't. It actually isn't an option, as it turns out. And so we must embrace it. Now there's part of it that was fearful for them. They didn't want some parts of it, but they said, we have things we value. We can't deny change. How do we keep what we value, but make sure that we can go with it? And to your point, trust that this will be able to be better if we participate and we try our best and whatever. And they knew themselves, they wouldn't quite know what they would become. That there wasn't actually eternal control. There was maybe an influencing of the trajectory, but that freezing Heraclitus's river was not possible. You're taking us immediately to our next point, which I can't wait to unpack now. So, you're taking us to, there's a sense of progress. Things will be better. Now we get to define better. And I will go into the exercise of defining better with you from a non-anthropocentric lens, not a misanthropic lens, but a more cosmic lens, the kind of process-oriented lens that you, I think, exemplify maybe more than the vast majority of academics and thinkers. Here's the thought experiment. Let us say that for a few 100 years, 1,000 years, million years, however long it takes, the symbiosis and unraveling process of which you and I are part, the flame, if you will, continues to go out and blaze into the multiverse as it has blazed up from that single cell or the things below it. It continues to blaze. And at some point, there isn't necessarily a human there, or even something of human lineage. It's possible at some point, even DNA won't be the substrate that is housing and unraveling complexity. It'll be other substrates. And DNA will have been a wonderful precursor, a wonderful birther of those new substrates, but maybe it won't play a role anymore. So not necessarily human anymore, but it is, to your point, better. It is a kind of progress. What would have to be happening for you to say, this is flourishing? In a cosmic sense, this seems to me to be flourishing. Now, you and I are only humans, so we obviously can't define everything, but you have this sense of progress and better. What would have to be better for you to look down after however many thousands of years? Maybe there's no more people necessarily, but you would say, wow, this is flourishing. What would that be for you, Francis?
My view of evolution is progressive in the sense that there is a direction, not an endpoint, not a goal, but you see that there is progress, and the progress evolutionarily, that's what Darwin said, it's fitness. Systems become more fit. But fit, of course, there are lots of different interpretations of fit. So I like to use what the theologian Teilhard de Chardin called of complexity consciousness. So he said during evolution, you have an increase in both complexity and consciousness. So what does that mean, complexity? It means that things that were independent, that were kind of just randomly moving about, they become integrated. Integrated means that they develop relationships that are what I call synergetic. That means that the relationship helps the different components that are in the relationships to do better than they did alone. That's what you see in ecosystems. No animal, no plant can live on its own. It lives in interaction with lots of other plants and animals. Maybe it eats them, but it can't live without them. So that means the whole ecosystem allows the different components of that ecosystem to live better together than if they would be alone. If you take any plant or animal out of the ecosystem and put it somewhere in a desert, it most likely wouldn't survive. So complexity means integration. Different things that were independent become to some degree dependent on each other, but by that kind of local dependency, they can flourish, they become in a sense more autonomous, they get more resources to grow. So that's at the level of the complexity, and at the level of the consciousness, well, if you extrapolate it in the longer term, to integrate with others means to coordinate your activity with the others. To coordinate means you need to know what the others are doing. You need to understand it. You need to be conscious of what's going on in your environment. And that's what you see in evolution. You start with bacteria that have a very limited consciousness. That means they know enough about what's going on in their immediate neighborhood. They can distinguish poison from food. And that's enough for them to move towards the food and away from the poison. We see that kind of goal-directed activity in even the simplest bacteria. And then, of course, if you grow in complexity, you go from bacteria to eukaryotes, to multicellular organisms, to plants, to animals. That consciousness expands. They become conscious of more and more things in their environment, and that allows them now to choose the positive, move away from the negative. It's the same like the bacteria that distinguish between poisonous molecules and food molecules. We learn more and more to distinguish between things that are good for us and things that are bad for us. Yes. And that's this expansion of consciousness. And that expansion of consciousness can only happen because we communicate, because we coordinate with all the others around us.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'm gonna start nutshelling your definition of flourishing based on what you've said. And by the way, for the folks that are tuned in the show notes, I will have a lecture from Francis about sort of this emergent complexity system. You have some very, very good 45-minute long lectures that I think really get into some of the core of what your PhD started with and where you've developed your thought. Because all of this notion of sort of unfolding and symbiogenesis could be its own, 12-hour conversation, of course, with you, right? But so we're just scratching the surface for the listeners. You should definitely check out those links in the notes. This is very, very important stuff. But what I'm hearing here is that your suspicion is flourishing would imply higher degrees of sort of symbiosis, symbiogenesis, the creation of new things, new emergent ways that things will depend on things. And sometimes maybe they depend on things by not being friendly and holding hands and singing Kumbaya. Maybe they depend on other things in ways that, when I look out at nature, Francis, it be not only Kumbaya. When I look at the microscopic level and the macroscopic level, I see non-Kumbaya stuff everywhere. Now, this isn't to say that I do not see a lot of coordination. I see plenty of it, but I see a wide range of ways that things can interact. Go ahead.
I mean, a lot of these things, people are often very naive about how ecosystems function. But for example, one of the things that always annoys me is this kind of and we should not eat animals because we are killing the animals. From an evolutionary point of view, cows, there would never have been as many cows on the earth if there weren't people to eat them. There would never have been as much wheat and corn and rice plants on the earth if there wouldn't have been people to grow them.
Yeah.
From an ecological point of view, we are living in symbiosis with the cows and with the wheat and with the corn and with the potatoes. And they are profiting from it. It's just that the naive view is killing something is bad, but you may be killing an individual, but you're actually growing the species.
So this is a really important. I want to touch on one thing there. So I love it. The direction you're going in, I am gonna. Oh my God, this is going to be amazing for the audience. So, one thing I will say is that some people I think do admit this. They would say, "Well, look, like some pigs, some cows, there's a lot more of them because of humans, and we're not determining the future, but we've determined a trajectory where we have maybe more of the kinds of animals that we have a shared interest with, etc. Some people would still say there's certain conditions of factory farming that they just think are probably brutally horrendous to sentient entities. However, other people would say, okay, it's brutally horrendous to sentient entities, but it makes meat and in so doing certain nutrients vastly more affordable to vastly more people. And when there's vastly more people, we seem to have been inventing more things. Now, I'm not saying either of those views are correct or encompass the totality, but do you see the validity of some of those worldviews there, particularly like the suffering of certain animals? Because certain animals, the bulk of mammalia today essentially lives in tiny little quadrants awaiting their slaughter at the hands of man. Now, I'm not saying at a cosmic view that's necessarily evil, but I'd be interested in your perspective because there's a lot of different views there.
Well, I would fully agree that you would not want to keep cows into small boxes where they can't move. So my view is give the cows as much as possible what cows expect. That means biologically they're expected to be in meadows where they eat grass. But the moment you kill them, they don't actually suffer because they don't expect to be killed. They don't feel anything while they're being killed. They're being killed. In nature, they would have been killed probably by a lion or by a horde of wolves, and they would have suffered much more. So the killing is not the suffering. If you keep them in factory conditions where indeed they are against their nature, I would say, no, I agree. We should as much as possible avoid that. But the killing itself, I don't consider that as inducing suffering.
Yeah, so the boxes maybe do, but the killing itself, as you had said, animals, in fact, to agree with you, many animals in nature, if I look under a microscope at some pond water, those little things, never mind the presumably sentient cows, which I think we could safely say are feeling something, are dying while being eaten alive and kicking and screaming.
Exactly.
This seems to me actually to be less preferable, at least at the moment of death. Now, I'm not justifying factory farming here. I'm just saying that it is a complex issue. The other thing you seem to be touching on is that the treatment of certain animals, yes, I mean, some things are maybe kind of good, kind of bad, whatever, but is the flame itself getting stronger? In other words, if some of these animals are consumed by humans and there's more of us, and now technological and cultural powers are unraveling and new intelligences enmeshed with AI are unraveling, and the process itself is unfurling more so because of the cows being consumed, maybe not because we're trying to be malicious here, but maybe the service of the greater flame is actually more important than any one torch. Like, for example, Francis, I have cells in my stomach that are born just to be boiled and then, pumped through my system. And I have cells at the soles of my feet who grow outwards to be ground away by, the hardwood floors, or, in my ancestral domain, maybe the prairies I would have roamed on or what have you in my evolutionary past. And their entire purpose is that. And we might say, what a tragedy, what an injustice. But my system requires it, actually. So do you see sort of the net of the animal system as, again, being in service of sort of a greater meta flame? Like what's the analogy you prefer?
Well, ecosystems, as I say, is a collection of different systems, of different species that together form a symbiotic whole. That means a whole that's synergetic, that functions better together than alone. But there is no ecosystem in which nothing is being eaten. Even the vegans are eating living plants. They are killing cells that are part of plants. They are stopping corns, they are stopping seeds from wheat from growing and developing into a new seed plant. It's part of biology. Biology cannot function without eating something else. So in that sense, I don't think you should moralize the fact that something is being eaten by something else. When I die, I most probably, if I get put in a grave, I will be eaten by worms and I will be eaten by bacteria. I would say that's part. Nature cannot function without some things consuming other things.
This is we're really getting there. We're really getting there. And I'm going to get down to the definition of flourishing, but there's a bit to unpack what you just said. So, would you suspect that on a meta level, like again, when we look down after X number of thousands of years, and it's not necessarily people, it's some, I would imagine, I don't know if you'd agree with this, potentially what would be observed in terms of what life is, the flame itself is, would be as unimaginably complex and expansive and might be operating on strata of nature and reality that are wholly beyond our imagination in every possible way. And so we would look down at utter, inconceivable complexity and unraveling. And if there be value and if there be understanding and there be new kinds of things beyond our ideas of value and understanding, we wouldn't even know where to start looking at it. Just like a sea snail would have very little benefit from the conversation you and I are having, or from my iPhone for that matter. So we seem to be on the same page there. This unraveling of emergent complexity, the system itself becoming more alive with possibility, but maybe not in a way, again, that a small thing necessarily considers. Some people might say, well, as we move to other substrates, like let's say maybe non-biological substrates, let's say that we find some, maybe it's not silicon, it's something new that we don't know of yet, or some set of compounds that we haven't put together in the right way, whatever, that seem to actually be able to model biological systems in terms of autopoiesis, the self-creation, that you very much admire and see as part of this process, which right now is clearly driven by biology in so much as we can tell. Physics permits it. Biology seems to get it done. There's a lot of mystery there, but it seems like that's it. At some point, maybe it's non-biological drivers and systems that are the unfolding and emergent. Do you expect that they would also form a kind of ecology, that they would also form sorts of competition and coordination at different strata that would be complex and rich in the same way when we look at a swamp or we look at the savanna or we look at the deep oceans? Do you suspect that will be, in so much as we can understand, universal even beyond biology?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my worldview on the basis of processes, I use a particular theory called chemical organization theory, which is a very nice abstract way of showing how things can become autopoietic. What you do in chemical organization theory, it's called chemical because it's inspired by chemical reaction, but it can be applied to any level: cognitive, social, economic, biological, anything that consists of processes. What is an autopoietic system? It's a cycle of processes that keep themselves alive. That means A leads to B, B leads to C, C leads back to A. The whole thing cycles. It keeps itself alive. So that is a very, I would say, a universal principle, that whenever some process gets into this kind of a loop, that it maintains itself, by definition, it will survive. If it doesn't get into this kind of a loop, if it turns into something else, by definition, it disappears. It turns into something else.
Yeah.
So all systems at all levels of complexity that you find that have some degree of stability, that means ability to survive, they have this kind of a closed loop, autopoietic self-production part. And self-production, because you're thinking about thermodynamics, any process is accompanied by some loss, some dissipation, some entropy. That means that to keep something alive, you need to consume something. There needs to be a source of energy. And on Earth, that source of energy is sun. Thanks to the sun, we can survive. If you go into the wider universe, you may need other sources of energy than just the energy of the sun, but you will always have this kind of a cycle of things producing other things, which in the end, again, produce the first thing, so that the whole thing keeps itself going.
Yeah. So in so much as you can see into the future, and my own personal belief here is I can see as far as I can see, And almost certainly there will be things that are shockingly beyond my conception, which of course I couldn't think of because my mind isn't even capable of it. Any human mind isn't capable of it. But what you're saying is, in so much as we can see going forward, this absorption and use of other, this isn't just a biological thing. This is I know your PhD early on was kind of grounded in some regard in cybernetics and whatnot, right? This is almost like a perpetuating system, cybernetics. So this is a broader dynamic, even not limited. Like you had said, it goes all the way down to chemicals, never mind to animals, is what you're getting at. Okay. So this is important for people to understand. I want to get into, I'm going to unpack a little bit more about your vision of flourishing, but I made a note to get into this idea of meta-system transition. So it seems to me that, there's different scientists that have put different markers in the ground where they've said that was a meta-system transition, that was a meta-system, right? The mitochondria entering the single cell, or eukaryotes emerging, or whatever other meta-systems, right? All sorts of things. Certainly the growth of the cortex at some level, people will attribute as some kind of meta-system transition. What I seem to be grasping is that from your belief, these emergent meta-system transitions are somewhat inevitable in basically all directions, so long as they be adaptive. If they permit the thing to maybe operate more adaptively in the environment, which normally seems to involve understanding, grasping it, and being able to have some control over it to behoove its own ends, as it has more of that, blossoming into new metasystems is somewhat inevitable. Is that a correct assumption, or am I framing this incorrectly? I don't want to misconstrue your ideas.
So generally, to survive in the long term, you need to be adaptive. That means sooner or later, things will change. If you can't adapt to the change, you die. So the whole thrust of evolution is to become more adaptive. And one way to do that is via a meta-system transition, because a meta-system transition suddenly makes the whole thing more adaptive. So how do I define a meta-system transition? I assume that the system follows a certain control model. That means the system obeys certain rules. The rules say, if that happens, then you should perform that action. So if the rules are appropriate, you will be able to deal with most situations. But occasionally there will be situations that your rules simply can't deal with. So what is a meta-system transition? That is that your rules themselves become adaptive. It's like you can react to something instinctively. Your instinct is the knowledge that is inbuilt in your genes. But some situations, your instinct is not enough. You need to learn. So learning means you can change the rules by which you would otherwise have reacted. So a meta-system transition is when the highest control level, that means the level where the rules are that tell you how to react to different conditions, when that level itself becomes adaptive, that means that there is some higher level that will now change the rules depending on the circumstances.
Yeah. What are your favorite examples to explain? Because we're about to get into the cognitive nature of meta-system transitions, which I know you wanted to unpack for us here. But as we get into that, just to crystallize, what are your favorite examples of meta-system transitions, whether it's before man, after man, whatever the case may be? What exemplifies this dynamic of the highest level of control itself adapting to the greater set of changes in this broader way? What makes this visual for people?
So the example I already said, it's in a sense the simplest one. Let's say you have a very primitive animal. It has a nervous system. The nervous system is rigid. It's defined by the genes. That means that, for example, let's say a sea anemone, you touch the sea anemone contracts. It's called the reflex movement. It's a reflex. It's inbuilt. But if now that animal would learn that in some cases, when it's touched by something that might eat it, it should contact, but in other cases it should not contact, it has more adaptivity. So learning is, you might say, one of the biggest meta-system transition, the transition from reflex instinctive behavior to behavior that adapts. Now, what specifies humans compared to animals is animals have this ability to learn, but humans have the ability to think. And what's the difference between learning and thinking? With learning, you need to experience a particular situation. You notice that in this situation, this thing may happen or not. You learn from your experience. What is thinking? It's imagining situations that you have never experienced before and using knowledge, logic, reasoning to say, if this would happen, then I should do this. And if I do that, then I can make this next step. And so you can design a whole complex thing, a building, a strategy, a policy on the basis of something that's not yet there. So that is, for me, the meta-system transition that characterized humanity compared to animals. It is that we can reason about things that are not there, that are counterfactual, and like that we can plan.
Yes. So we let ideas die instead of individuals. Mm-hmm. A much faster set of iteration cycles for adaptiveness than counting on the lifespans of individuals. To your point, you were about to get into something else.
Yeah. So that is the level of humans. The level of humans is you are educated with a set of concepts, of symbols, a set of rules. You use those rules to reason. That reasoning allows you to invent new things, to imagine new things. But where do the concepts and where do the rules come from? They come from culture. And what's culture? It's a very slowly evolving thing that we don't really control. So what would be the next meta-system transition? That we could control this cultural evolution. That means that we could develop new concepts, new rules, new theories, not just by waiting decades until some very smart Einstein-like scientist has this new insight. If we could develop these new theories, these new rules, these new concepts on the spot, that would be a higher level of intelligence. So what I am kind of proposing is that we are now undergoing that transition, and the research in AI, in cognition, in lots of these things is about finding these rules of how you create new concepts on the spot instead of waiting until cultural evolution has come up with new insight. You kind of try to understand the process of generating new concepts and new rules and new theories immediately.
Yeah. And so this is a metasystem transition at a cognitive level is what you're getting at. So so this worldview shift we're going to is, I'm going to do a distillation of what we've just talked about and see if I'm right from your vantage point. We talked about the Newtonian view granting a new, wider set of powers and a greater range of concern than the mystical worldview in general. And then we talked about how this new, more process-oriented, evolutionary worldview will maybe grant some additional powers. What you seem to be saying is it grants us not only, it grants us powers to be more adaptive in an ongoing way. It grants us the power to have culture itself be swirling, adapting, adjusting in a more living, breathing way than these static periods like the Middle Ages or modernity, which we could say stretches, some people would argue stretches 200 or more years, some people would, whatever. What you're saying is the metasystem transition is, it's actually, it grants us, so science couldn't have emerged from the mystical worldview alone at all. So moon landing, navigating, all sorts of invention, not possible, not happening. Newtonian sort of modernity made that occur. Similarly, adapting, surfing the speedy waves of change that are to come by orienting ourselves to whatever is adaptive in a more nimble way isn't possible with the Newtonian anthropocentric worldview and will be only possible by the new worldview. Am I nutshelling this correctly or incorrectly?
Yeah. In a sense, the the scientific worldview, the Newtonian worldview, was kind of a first step in this metasystem transition. So let's say the mythical worldview kind of assumed that there is some order in the world and that we know what it is and that it basically doesn't change. What the Newtonian worldview said was, well, we can't just accept things on authority. We have to observe, we have to model, we have to calculate. So it became much more critical, but it still kind of assumed, well, once we have done that, we will have this complete worldview. We will know exactly what the different objects in the world are, what the different laws of nature will be, and then the world will be finished. We will have complete knowledge, and that's it. The next step that we are now undergoing is say, well, actually, these laws of nature, they're not fixed. They change. The objects that we're thinking about, they're not fixed. They change. So if we really want to understand, we should also understand the change of these laws and the change of these objects. Yeah. And that's where we are getting at this moment.
Yeah, okay. So I forget, Blumenfeld was this Austrian philosopher who sort of posited how modernity replaced a theocratic or theocentric sort of worldview, as the worldview was not argued into existence. It asserted itself because it was so much better suited to the problems we had to face and the opportunities that we could pursue. But the problems were more robust and complex, and the opportunities more robust and complex. And it was not like the argument was really good. I like his argument, or even just the science itself. Oh, the science seems to line up. All of that was meta-adaptive, and that's why it shifted. And so what you're saying is the same thing for the next transition, that it's meta-adaptive for us to be able to surf the waves of change our orientation, see things as process and complexity, and deal with it, including ourselves. And that we must make that shift in some regard, and that the worldview change is actually, tell me if I'm right or wrong here, it is the start of a sense of embrace of all of the unfolding that is then to come. Because the older worldviews were pretty static, right? We had a Middle Ages for God knows how long. Mystic traditions were maybe since the beginning of man up until pretty recently. And so this is almost the worldview that is required for us to deal with and even consider what is to come. Now, I want to pause on that. You had said that you have an optimism, which reminds me of kind of Ralph Waldo Emerson in some regards, who I'm sure in Europe is not very popular these days, but before World War I used to be rather popular in this nation of mine. The sort of sense that more ascension into new sets of powers and grandeur and complexity seems to just be happening. That said, you are also encouraging people to embrace and understand it, presumably because you think that maybe there's something that can be done about it. Like in other words, maybe it would be better for us if we were to embrace it. I could see someone with your degree of optimism, I don't know, going on a lot of vacations, reading some fun novels, and knowing in the back of his mind that surely all will unravel and all will be well. What is the role of humanity in this unraveling? Like, why even talk about it or kind of encourage the transition if there be a sort of inevitability to it?
Well, inevitability
is maybe too strong. Maybe too strong.
I wouldn't say it's inevitable. I mean, the whole trend is going in that direction. It could potentially be stopped. I mean, you can always have some really backward-looking political system that suppresses all kind of new ideas and thinking, or of course there could be a nuclear war that erases life.
Yes.
You never know for sure.
I would concur. Yeah.
But the general trend in evolution is increasing adaptivity. Increasing adaptivity at a certain stage will require a metasystem transition. That metasystem transition, as I see it, is already started. So unless there is some really major catastrophe, I don't see that process stopping, because you're kind of halfway and the whole trend is going into this understanding of how things change at the deepest level. So it's also a very stressful process, because we are in this process of things changing ever more rapidly, things become more complex at an alarming rate. It's very understandable that people psychologically feel very stressed and are very anxious, and some are really despairing and are ready and are believing that the world is ready to collapse. But from my point of view, we are going through a transition of which the end result would be much better than what we have. But the transition itself is painful, because all these certainties are put into doubt and the whole thing becomes much more unpredictable, which means in the short term, lots of people will suffer from it. They may lose their job, they may become depressed, they may commit suicide, they may become addicted to all kinds of drugs and computer games.
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, these negative side effects, they can't really be avoided. We can try to soften the blow by understanding what's going on, and that's what I see as my mission in life. I think that this transition is happening by clarifying to people what is going on. I think a lot of these negative side effects we can deal with them better. We can learn how to cope with them, because we can see better why we are doing it, why we need to do it, and what is the closest, the shortest path to get there. The more detours we make, the more we will suffer in the meantime.
I guess there's many analogies. I'll make two analogies and see if you have anything to add to them. So there's the Japan analogy, where they looked at China and they said, wow, a total denial of modernity means you get blown through by modernity. Modernity will just eat you. Like technological developments and new sets of powers and coordination, new sciences, etc., they literally grant so much power that you are buffered out of existence by the things that have that higher degree of power. That seems horrible. And so they knew, leaping into the Meiji Restoration, that to your point, there's going to be some suffering here. Traditional ways of living are going to be disrupted immediately. Industrial kinds of work, which in some regards might be more grueling and demanding during certain spans of time, might have to be adapted in order for us to have any chance of surviving as a country and having any relevance in this new world that seems predicated on technology and science and coordination at higher levels than Japan was ever doing. And so they had to bite the bullet, so to speak, because the alternative of trying to freeze Heraclitus's river was way worse than jumping in Heraclitus's river and at least determining where you swim. You don't know where the trajectory is going ultimately, but you can influence it a little bit. You can't influence it at all if you are plowed through by it. That's sort of the first analogy. I could use the Kodak analogy of film versus digital, but the Meiji one feels the most apt here. Is this likened by your own mission? Hey, folks, we must participate and try to make this better and look squarely at it as opposed to denying it. Is this the same thing in some regard for you?
Yeah, I think that's a very good analogy. It's like, things are changing. Lots of things are frightening. How do you reduce the fear? By having a better understanding of what precisely is changing and what would be the best possible outcome. So you kind of try to imagine different possible outcomes, and if you have a better idea of what would be the best possible outcome, then you can steer towards that outcome.
Yeah. So let's click a little bit into better, because now, by the way, this is far from my own belief, but I'm going to play devil's advocate because every day of my life I hear this argument, sometimes very aggressively directed towards me, sometimes in a spirit of curiosity and civility. But here's the argument. What is better if it be not better for man? We invented morality. Like this, like if something is better, by what criteria? If it's some new alien mind, who's to say that that's better? Okay, it's more complex, or it has different sets of powers, more expansive, whatever than us. Why should we pursue that? We're humans. We should do what's best for humans. Nothing is better outside of what we damn well think is better. This is a remarkably common argument. Remarkably common. What would be your argument to that argument?
Well, the higher level, the meta-system level above the human level, will be so much more powerful in solving all problems that we have. I mean, we have certain intuitive ideas about what's better. Like, it's better not to be hungry than to be hungry. It's better not to be stressed. It's better to be happy. It's better to have good relationships with people. We have a number of intuitive things we associate with better. But at this higher level, where betterness is defined in this idea of greater adaptivity, greater integration, greater synergy, all these simpler, more concrete aspects of better, they will just become much easier to achieve. So getting to that higher level will make all the things that now we consider better easier to achieve, and it will open this whole new realm of things which we can't imagine yet. So,
yeah, I concur. I'm going to nutshell it and see if you agree with this, because you just said a really cool thing of new kinds of better we can't imagine or couldn't currently achieve. The way I think about this a little bit is like this. This is the framing I'll sometimes use. I suspect yours will have a different tinge or maybe add entirely different things to it. As the set of powers of this net system of the overall flame seems to expand, it seems to birth the things we think are valuable. What do we think is valuable? I don't know. I'll give you a couple. Positive sentient experiences. Love, enthusiasm, awe, joy. And of course, we might imagine the pleasure of eating food or mating might have been experienced by many creatures before mammals ever were a possibility. And then new strata, presumably chimpanzees have a wider set of positive and negative emotions that they have access to, sentient experiences, than, earthworms or what have you. Presumably we have many more. So this beckons the idea that there would be more blooming of possible sentient good experiences that could exist in forms beyond ourselves. But it also beckons the question that if the expanding set of powers, which is aiming to be adaptive, consciousness was not sprinkled on animals by some random benevolent deity. Consciousness seems to, again, have emerged for adaptive purposes. But consciousness seems very, very valuable, right? The torment or pleasure of individual sentient things feels very valuable. Here's what I wonder. As the system bubbles up, so the system bubbled up and it found a pocket, and that pocket was called consciousness. And as it turns out, this seems pretty valuable. Like it bubbled up a thing like that didn't exist before, at least in so much as we know it, that was like incredibly valuable. Here's what I wonder. As the bubbling occurs, how many other pockets of value beyond our possible conception could emerge? Things that aren't just more consciousness, more love, more of what monkeys can imagine, but entirely new magazines and stratospheres of types of value wholly ununderstood by man and maybe not even conjured forth in the entire cosmos. And so when I say better in ways we can't imagine, this be how I frame it. How do you frame it? Do you concur with that framing? Do you think of it in a different way? I'd love to know your thoughts on this.
That's the whole idea of the meta-system transition. If you go to this meta-system, you are at a level that is so much above what was there before that wholly new possibilities emerge. Like I gave the example, humans are above animals in the sense that they can imagine situations that they have never experienced. It's as if you would ask a chimpanzee, can you imagine the beauty of being able to design a building of 10 stories high? A chimpanzee cannot imagine think something like that, like designing and making a blueprint of a building. Well, now architects do it regularly, and it's part of what's being human. You can design a building with a little bit of knowledge of architecture. And it's a topic I wanted to pick up earlier. It's this famous question in astrobiology. If there is so much life in the cosmos, and if there are other intelligent civilizations, why haven't we picked up any signals from them? So my interpretation, it has been called the transcension hypothesis. It is that as soon as an civilization gets the kind of level of intelligence that we have, it transcends to a higher level that is so much higher that we would not understand it, which means that maybe the civilizations are there and maybe they are sending packages of information around it, but if we would get such a package, we wouldn't even recognize it as a package of information. It's so much beyond us that we can't imagine it.
It operates at different strata of nature itself. And again, you and I we have a much greater access to what we think nature is. And in a functional way, it is kind of an access to nature in a pragmatic sense. The nature of the atom or of disease or what have you. But like these new entities would swim in a state space of cosmic possibility and access to nature and levels of nature, where it may be swimming in lakes that we couldn't ever conceive of or bump into, given what we're doing now, ever. And this is what you seem to be saying here.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually think that is, some people say, I think this is a very silly argument. Here's what I consider to be a remarkably silly argument. Well, at some point they develop and then they learn they can upload their minds and they can experience pleasure in these little simulations and they just kind of sit on their planet and they simulate. I suspect it isn't a stopping of unfolding and a pausing on pleasure. It's an unraveling into nature in ways we can't conceive of. And this seems to be what you're advocating for here as most likely. Yeah, I'm with you on that. So, okay, this is really cool. We've gotten to a lot of your worldview here. I've got two other questions I want to touch on as we wrap up. And I could go in 100 directions, but I want to make sure we touch on the fundamentals of the Worthy Successor series. One thing I'd love to know is, as you look forward, you have this purpose of framing this worldview. As you look forward, at what's happening today in terms of the flows of money, in terms of the conflicts or coordination between governments, in terms of human culture, in terms of technology, what are you using as a detector of, are we moving in the right direction? You're advocating for this flourishing. And, I look out and I say, is all human conflict counter to this flourishing? Is all, I don't know, like maybe a takeover of a new theocratic religion that pushes us towards mysticism and further away from the worldview you advocate. Maybe that would be a detector that we're moving in the wrong direction. Maybe if artificial general intelligence, if people were really trying to make sure it instantiated consciousness, because I think, Francis, to your point, we could imagine an artificial general intelligence that is a brute military optimizer, completely unconscious, that is able to crush, able to dominate, able to overpower us, to run the economy, etc., but not able to bloom. It doesn't have the tendency to continuous autopoiesis. And so we could find like technology trends that could be horrible or very good, cultural trends that could be horrible or very good in the service of the flame. What do you look for over the years ahead to see, are we moving closer or further from an expanse of the flame? What matters to you there?
Well, my practical values, in the sense of what I would be looking out for, are pretty, you might say, old-fashioned humanists or enlightenment values. That means I'm looking at people being more educated, more open-minded, more secure, better fed, healthier. There are quite a number of studies internationally where you compare the development level of countries. There is, for example, the famous Human Development Index, which is a kind of a combination of wealth, educational level, and life expectancy. And what you see is these measures, they are not perfect, but they capture typically the kind of things that are important. The countries with the highest human development index are typically the countries where people want to live, and the one with the lowest are the ones where they live.
Exactly.
You find, for example, if you go at the lowest level, you find that Afghanistan is somewhere very much at the bottom, and then places like Finland and Sweden are somewhere at the top. And it's pretty obvious that the one is better than the other. So these kind of measures, you want to keep track of them, and it's not always that we make progress. Some countries effectively go down. Afghanistan is one example. The moment that the Taliban took over, things got worse for the people in Afghanistan.
We could argue that the Swedes have made some questionable choices about what kinds of people at what level of bulk they are to import all at once. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of factors that could take a functioning society that is high functioning and high trust and sort of like completely degrading the hell of it. Yeah, you know, there's a theocratic directions. There's all sorts of things that I guess could crumble the human what do you call it? The kind of human flourish, human development index, or what have you, right? So you look out for that. What if technology?
And for example, one of the things I noticed, I did the exercise because I'm teaching a course on technology and society, in which I wanted to try to see, has technology led to progress? So I mapped this human development index thanks to this beautiful database that's called Our World in Data.
Yes, yes.
You can choose which countries or which regions you look in there, and then you see that Afghanistan is pretty much at the bottom, that Syria started out well and then they got a civil war and they dropped. And then you have the US and my own country, Belgium, and then you see that Belgium starts out a little bit lower than the US, and then you see that they're kind of almost parallel, and then the US goes down relative to Belgium.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Yep. Obviously, what's going on in the US at the moment is not ideal.
Yeah. So looking for human development index stuff seems important to you. Do you look to anything in technology? In other words, I'll say it pretty frankly. I think we're making pretty sincere headway on things that will be more generally intelligent than humans in, let's call it, all economic and military applications. I don't know if we're going to nail some of the other stuff, but in terms of like the, you know, adaptiveness, as you say it, you know, can you fight? Can you earn? Can you innovate? Like I think general intelligence. I don't think tomorrow we're going to have a machine that will do everything a person can. But Jeepers Crow, it does seem like we're making some creeping progress on being able to outstrip people in a broad swath of what we are currently proud resides squarely in the domain of man. And it seems like as that trajectory takes off, we have companies partnering with defense organizations. We have companies saying they're focused on control or safety, but really they're just plowing forward to as much race to artificial general intelligence as possible. It's total state of nature. It seems like there are ways the technology might not go right. Brain-computer interface, artificial general intelligence. Is there anything you're looking for in those developmental trajectories of these defining technologies that will bring about this transcension you've been discussing? What are you looking for to go well or not well among the tech side of the sphere in addition to the well-being of man?
Well, my general attitude towards AI is pretty positive. That means I think that these simple things like ChatGPT, they are extremely useful. I mean, people always, there's this negativity bias. Whenever something goes wrong, it immediately gets in the news. All the moments when it goes right, it means that people ask a question to ChatGPT or to Gemini and they get a useful answer that solves the problem. Nobody speaks about it. It's when they give a wrong answer that it immediately gets into the news, when somebody commits suicide. So I'm not saying that there are no problems. There definitely are problems. That's what technology is. You start, you have a number of bugs, but the general trend, I think, is positive. What I'm lacking in the technology at the moment, it is this transcendence idea, the going beyond the level of concepts and rules. And it's a classical discussion in AI between the good old-fashioned symbolic AI and the neural network AI. At the moment, the neural network AI is dominant, for good reason, because it's much more flexible. But what it doesn't do is give you new rules, new concepts. It just recombines things that it has learned that people have already said. So for me, the next step in the AI would be that you would have an AI that can induce new rules, new concepts, new categories from the data it gets. And that would require some kind of an integration, synthesis between the symbolic AI and the neural network AI. The neural network AI is at the meta-system transition level of what I call learning. It's very good at learning. The symbolic AI is at the meta-system transition of what I call thinking. It's good at reasoning if you give it a concept to reason with. But what you really want is that the learning level would generate new concepts that then the reasoning level can reason with. And that is at the moment not yet existing. And I don't think it's that difficult to develop. So you need new paradigms to do that. I probably expect that in the next 10, 20 years it will appear, but it's not yet there.
I'm with you. I actually concur. Let me ask the following question, though. Let's say that even a system that can't generate these new concepts to reason on is able to more stably do most economically valuable work than people are, from graphic design to whatever the case may be. And then at some point, most of the supply chains and even economic activity is actually agents talking to agents. And then at some point, the whole techno-capital system that we surf on is actually surfing at the behest of a coordination mostly of machine mind than man mind. In other words, the whole international supply chain and internet and all that is kind of, it's not mostly doing what the monkeys want. It's actually mostly doing what seems to behoove whatever the emergent goals or the stated goals or what have you have been of these new this new class of mind, which might not be able to do the kind of exploration you're saying, but it is damn well able to handle a huge bulk of what we're currently hanging out on. I guess a worry that I have heard articulated that I think has some merit is that if such a system were possible and we were surfing upon it and it sort of crumbled our own control and sort of ways of doing things, that might be rough. Because that system may lack two things. One, autopoiesis, per your point, right? It doesn't yet have this ability to generate and extrapolate new concepts. Two, sentience. In other words, it is about as morally relevant in terms of in utilitarian terms. I'm not a utilitarianist in a hardcore sense, but I think there is merit to the suffering of entities. I don't go out pulling the legs off of even insects for fun because I suspect their sentience is somewhat real and relevant in some regard. It would be as sentient as my chair. Or let's say it might be. Some people think AGI will automatically be conscious. Some say it will never be conscious. Most people are a little bit wishy-washy about because most people I think are honest enough to not be certain about their theory of consciousness in other substrates. So there could be a world where the practical, economic, the military, the supply chain starts to be run by and maybe running away from man and extrapolating and coordinating itself in ways outside of our control, and it's not autopoietic or not conscious, that might crush the flame more than expand the flame if it were to happen. Now, I'm not saying that's inevitable. I'm not saying that's even likely necessarily, but I am saying it seems as though there is a possibility of a runaway AI that isn't conscious at all and isn't autopoietic at all. But it still is enough to sort of outcompete us in some practical sense. Is this even a risk worth considering? Or would you say it is literally not worth considering?
Well, I like a particular paradigm towards the evolution of AI that's called AI as normal technology. And what it says is AI will be used for things for which it is useful, but we don't yet know for which things it will be really useful. So there will be a lot of trial and error, and there will be a lot of things that we have to find out. Does AI indeed do that well, or does it make too many mistakes, or does it lead to negative side effects? That is very pragmatic. You need to test it out. You need to see. You need to try out lots of things. And it will help us in lots of things. In a number of things, it will not be so good. And we will maybe decide that we will not use it.
Yeah.
We can only find out by actually trying it. And it takes time. I don't think at this moment we can say that AI application will be good, that AI application will be bad.
I'm with you.
We need to try it and take enough time to observe what's going on and then adjust.
Got it. Now, I guess the argument sometimes put forth. Now, I'm actually quite sympathetic there. The argument sometimes put forth is, hey, it might make sense to have some kind of international standards of coordination as the systems get vastly more powerful because, and again, this is the argument put forth, if there be a system which is able to operate autonomously, most people want. So when I look at practical AI, it is gaining an autonomy on a regular basis. The AI in banking that is detecting fraud used to merely score the fraud with a little red flag. Then it would deny transactions full out if it was above a certain confidence threshold of it being fraud. Then it would provide it would do the research for the human analyst. Human's not even doing the research anymore. It's picking up on the things that are valuable. Then it's handling more complex cases. This is what adaptiveness looks like. And so adaptiveness is autonomy, as it turns out. And so the thought is maybe, these systems simply by our own use of them, our own demands upon these systems require their continuous autonomy. Simply by that occurring, there could be systems grandly powerful, which at some point we'd never be able to put under our control and we wouldn't know where they would go. Now, I'm not saying we're there now, but some people suspect we could eventually get there. Like, I don't know, maybe it's in 20 years, Francis. I don't know. Okay. But some people suspect maybe at some point, some degree of standards of coordination could make sense because as these things start running the show and are capable of building their own hardware better than the hardware we have, making economic decisions better than the decisions we make, executing in the field of battle better than we ever could execute in the field of battle. There could be it just runs the show and then we don't get the show back and we don't know where it goes kind of thing. I'm not saying that's tomorrow, but that's the argument sometimes put forth. Do you suspect maybe that by the time it is capable of that kind of unraveling and run away, it is carrying at that point, maybe in your opinion, it is carrying the flame. In other words, it has the higher tier and order of goals, and maybe it ought do the unraveling. And maybe at that point, it maybe is sort of safe to say, let it continue forth as we've continued forth beyond the Homo erectus. Let me know how you would touch on this.
Well, the autonomy depends on what I call a value system. That means an autonomous system is a system that has its own goals. Up to now, all our technologies, including AI, is obeying us. That means we impose the goals. We tell the AI system do that.
Yes.
Now, you want it to be more autonomous, but it's autonomous within a context. Like
currently.
My favorite cybernetic example, because it's so simple, is a thermostat. I tell the thermostat I would like to keep a temperature of 21 degrees Celsius. The thermostat autonomously decides when to switch on the heating and when to switch off the heating. But I have imposed a goal. I have given it autonomy on the action. And that's what you want basically AI at this stage to do. You tell it a goal, detect fault. You don't care how it detects fault, but you want it to be effective. That means to detect fault and not to tell you this is fault when it's not fault, and not to let fault slip. So that means you will want to have some kind of a safeguard. You will want to have some kind of a check-up. And economics, businesses can't afford to have an AI that makes serious mistakes. So they will give autonomy up to the point where they can trust that it will not abuse that autonomy.
Just like you would with a human. Just like you would with a human, right?
Exactly. So I'm very skeptical about this argument that because it's AI, suddenly it will start doing all kinds of things that we don't want it to do. It still is a technology that we have programmed to do our bidding, to do the things we want to do. And I mean, I know your argument is that the AI may become smarter than us, and therefore it may be better to give more control to it. Well, we will give it more and more control on instrumental tasks. It means the goals, we will still want to make sure that it doesn't kill people, that it doesn't make us unhealthy, that it doesn't make us stressed if that's not necessary. So, of course, it will not be obvious. All these systems, you have to try them out. You have seen what works, what doesn't work, but you will learn. You will learn if it does things that you really don't like. You will stop it. You will say, okay, I take away this autonomy.
To me, detecting fraud is instrumental. So this is the way I foresee the prompting of an AI. I'll give you the steps. Step 1, give me 7 versions of this email subject line for my marketing activity for my e-commerce company. Step 2, write the entire email marketing sequence and landing page to sell this product for my e-commerce company. Step 3, make all the pay-per-click advertising and product decisions for my e-commerce company that generates the most sales. Step 4, grow my e-commerce company. Step 5, make me money. Generally, I don't care how, Francis. I don't care. Step 6, money is instrumental as well, Francis. Do I need money? No, I wish for my well-being and my survival. So my demands of the system will eventually just be, treat me as God. Give me all. Behoove my interests. Mm-hmm. It isn't fraud. Fraud, it's never been fraud. Ever. It's never been any specific e-commerce business. Ever. It's never been money. Ever. It's been my power and pleasure and my own persistence and expansion. And so it seems to me that by our own demands, we don't keep it in boxes. By our own demands, we ask of it to essentially become a deity at some point, because it isn't making a sandwich. That's the goddamn goal. It's the ultimate satisfaction of our drives and our own persistence. So there's an attractor state to it opening up to more things. Now, by the way, I'm not saying that means something bad. I'm saying that that's probably part of what you're talking about, a degree of symbiosis of minds where our powers expand kind of with it in this mesh that eventually bubbles into something we cannot conceive of. But it does seem to me that mesh will imply demands that become pretty close to unbounded at some point. And then widely higher from there. Now, I think your suspicion, which by the way, I'm quite sympathetic to, your suspicion is that as we test and try, we will end up finding things that are net detrimental when we have the AI do it, and we'll kind of turn those things down. We'll do more of the things that are good. But presumably you would say this higher ascension of the goals we beckon of these systems, because we never wanted the sandwich, Francis. We never wanted the fraud to be detected. We wanted something more. We wanted our power and persistence. These are just petty little individual anachronistic garbage to serve the more eternal goal. So like those demands ascending would be part of a merger of man-machine mind that would bubble into maybe the new meta system, even beyond the meta system we're talking about, that would then conceive of new goals, etc. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to contextualize how you see the future. And it is quite an optimistic one that I like hearing. Did I nutshell that appropriately, or would you frame it differently?
Well, my view of the next meta system level is what I call the global brain. And the global brain is this kind of huge symbiotic network of human and AI. That means all kind of intelligences that are coordinated in such a way that they help each other. That means that the control will be at the level of this kind of emergent level of the global brain. The whole human civilization with all its technologies. So it will no longer be a question of, is it the human that are in control? Is it the AI that are in control? They are all just part of this huge system. And that huge system will have an implicit control level. It will be autopoietic. That means it will keep its components alive. It will make its components function well, both the human components and the AI components. And at a certain moment, you can't say anymore that the AI or the humans are in control. They are part of this larger system, and it's at the emergent level that the control will be. That's why the meta system will be at the global brain level. But to get there, we will create AI that is doing our bidding, and then we will give it more and more autonomy. But it's not as if the AI will develop its own goals completely independently of us. It will always be in this symbiotic relationship.
Well, I guess always in this temporary period while we're merging with it, right? I mean, everything is permanent to a degree. Like, in other words, it'll share our goals in a phase, and then at some point there will be mergers and there'll be new things, and it won't be like the year is 5 billion AD and humans are in the driver's seat and all the future intelligences are like, I actually don't foresee that you're saying that. I foresee that you're saying there will be a degree of steering and shared interest in some regard during this transitory period into a new kind of blossoming beyond which maybe we will not understand. But that for the foreseeable future, this is a degree of optimism. For a foreseeable future, there will be a kind of alignment with us and with our goals. Maybe not eternally, if I'm picking up what you're putting down.
The alignment, for me, actually, alignment in AI at the moment has become a term to denote a problem. While for me, alignment is the essence of evolution. That means different systems, when they interact, they tend to align spontaneously because that's what's best for them. It's not being in conflict is not good for either parties. If they align, it's good for both of them. So the AI will align to humans and humans will align to AI. They will form this big symbiotic organism in which the different parts are aligned to each other. And it's quite possible indeed, as you say, in 5 billion AD, that there wouldn't be anything left that looks like human. Just like now in our body, there is hardly anything left that looks like a bacteria, and maybe the mitochondria are a little bit kind of remainders of bacteria that used to be in our body, but you can't recognize them as bacteria anymore except at this very abstract level. So I imagine that humans as such will indeed be kind of subsumed at some level, and they will not be recognizable as human individuals anymore.
I love the honesty here, Francis, as we wrap up. In the internet world, people will really be angry with you for saying things like what you just said there, right? Where eventually there will be this subsumed. Like, there are some people, Francis, for whom they would say they are ostensibly agnostic, but ultimately their sacred has transferred to the shape of man. Their sacred has transferred to anthropocentrism. Anthropocentrism, in other words, it used to be the Sky Father who made us in his image, and then we kind of got rid of the Sky Father, but like ultimately we still are the sacred image. Ultimately we are kind of actually the God, right? And so some people take this extremely personally, but I like the framing. And to your point, I think that some people say alignment is the eternal bending of all future life to behoove a certain frozen kind of life that should remain at the top for eternity, while I think there is a kind of cosmic alignment of AGI where we would hope the technology would do what you had said, contribute to the evolutionary process, to the unfolding. Let us align it to that which expands the flame. So I'm completely with you there. And I think it's been a tremendous amount of fun to be able to explore your worldview. Again, for the listeners who are tuned in terms of emergent complexity in systems, check out the link in the show notes. Francis, I know that's all we have for time, but it was a real blast and pleasure. Thank you so much for being able to be with us on the show.
Okay, thank you. It was a very interesting conversation.
So that's all for this episode of The Trajectory. A big thank you to Francis for joining us from Belgium, and thank you to you for tuning in all the way through to the end of this episode. As usual, I've got some thoughts on this episode that I want to be able to lay out and share. I think Francis's general idea of sort of meta-system transition is really crucial, and there are some interesting thinkers that have touched on this in various essays that we've had and various books that I've read. Francis, I think, really puts a finger on what meta-transition implies and kind of how inconceivable it could be to the systems below it. But I think he articulates it well enough where we could maybe imagine some of those steps forward. One of the things that stood out to me, there's kind of two things I'll highlight here, is the idea that our shift in worldview to this more evolutionary emergent worldview, which embraces that all is process, all is becoming, and that's not really a stoppable thing. That worldview shift that he's highlighted here, he frames as allowing us to embrace the next meta-system transition that we're going through now and potentially guide and make sense of it as opposed to be victim to it. And we use the analogy in this episode of the Meiji Restoration in Japan, where China sort of denied modernity for as long as they could, then they paid a horrible price, and then eventually they got on the bandwagon of modernity, as opposed to Japan, who sort of hopped on rather swiftly, knowing that an attempt at stasis would be detrimental. Francis's mission of sort of preparing us from a worldview standpoint to deal with the metasystem transition, I think, is a noble aim, is one that this channel is very much congenial with. In addition, when I talked to him about what we'd want to hope for in the near term, he mentioned something interesting that tied to earlier in the episode. He said, he almost said it like it was kind of a little bit trite, like, well, for me, I'm looking for kind of enlightenment values. He said something like people being more educated, open-minded, more secure in their physical needs. And he sort of saw the shift to the Newtonian view, the sort of mechanical clockwork nature view, as kind of a first step to this cosmic view that we have, because it did kind of ground us in having more control, ground us in eventually a kind of humanism and an understanding of sort of our own elevation. And his hope seems to be that we continue to elevate, and we elevate with the technologies we're developing. And he does have an optimism that there will be a symbiosis with that technology, that it will not run away with its own set of goals that are horrendously detrimental in any kind of near-term circumstance. I don't know if I share the total extent of his optimism there, but I think the argument might be compelling. And if I've moved in any direction in the last 6 months, it is a bit more towards an optimism around our circumstances there. He touches on this sort of hope that the transition to the worthy successor will be grounded in a more educated, secure, open-minded humanity. Those exact three phrases were not necessarily used by Michael Johnson and Joe Carlsmith, two of our recent episodes on the Worthy Successor series, but they did say something similar to that. Let us sort of position ourselves to be in a better place to make better decisions, a healthier place as a human civilization, as individuals and as countries and as an international community. And from there, allow for the blooming, hopefully without as much rife conflict, et cetera, et cetera. Although Francis is rather squarely frank about the fact that new conflicts, new transitions will exist. He was far from kumbaya. Francis, much like Brian Swim, who we had on back, I believe, in episode 19 of the Worthy Successor series, Francis, much like Brian Swim, many of his essays, if you watch them, and there's one of them linked in the show notes that I highly recommend, if you tune into his essays, you might say, well, he wants the biosphere to get along. He wants everybody to kind of be happy, and then things will kind of change, but maybe humans will be all okay in the process. And again, normally that's why it's phrased, because it's very uncouth to speak frankly about what it implies for humanity as we go through those transitions. But Francis was pretty frank about that. I appreciated it. I thought it was fantastic. And his notion of the powers we unlock and the advantage of the worldview shift, I'm more or less convinced that that's the case. And I consider myself sort of a servant of that worldview shift in many regards. I think many of you who are tuned in are as well. If you're not, that's okay. Hopefully you benefit from these episodes anyway. I certainly felt like I benefited from Francis's episode. I hope you did too. We have many interesting Worthy Successor episodes moving forward. As you can see, I'm very heavily focused on Worthy Successor recently, and you're going to see a lot more of that into the near future as well. So stay tuned here on The Trajectory. I'm grateful you were here today, and I'll catch you the next time.